Historical settings for adventures can lend a lot of intrigue and excitement to your tabletop fantasy role-playing, and as somebody who's spent a far too great period of time studying history and the human movements therein, man, I've got some ancient civilizations that would make great tabletop settings for you. Hello everybody, my name's Kyle, I'm the Dork. A couple things, if you want to help us out, we've got a Patreon, $3 to $10 a month. You get yourself some free role-playing games or your name in the credits. Also, you can get RPGs over at itch.io, and again, if you want physical copies, you can get them from Tabletop Bookshelf, Indie Press Revolution, and of course, our buddies over at Exalted Funeral. Now, if you are here for historically themed tabletop role-playing content, you have come to the right place. And today, we're going to be diving into some cultures and some histories that I think would make for really interesting tabletop role-playing. However, before we begin, these are real cultures, these are real histories, they're authentic to those people. If you're going to include these as inspiration in your games, please make sure that you're being respectful of doing so. Again, this is the part of the caveat where I tell you I was trained as a medievalist, and so my specialty was in Western Europe. So I am very much outside of my comfort zone, and I leaned a lot on some primary sources that were authentic to those cultures. I would encourage you to do the same if you are going to be using these for your role-playing games. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about Cahokia. I mentioned Cahokia in one of our real-life dungeon videos, and I have to mention it again because of how impressive it is. When we think of Native Americans, a lot of times we go to either the Iroquois or the Apache, at least here in the United States, and we often forget that for a large amount of North American history, Mississippian culture was a huge thing. It was a confederation that lasted legitimately thousands of miles and encompassed parts of both America proper, what is now Canada today, and Central America, and even in some cases had trade routes stretching into South America. It's so impressive that they managed to do this entire thing without roads, without power tools, without brick masonry at all. Most of the structures in Cahokia are dirt and wood, which makes the size, scope, and scale of this empire even more amazing to think about. Now, before I delve into how I would approach this, or how you would enjoy this, I'm actually going to throw a shout out to Coyote and Crow, which is a fantastic role-playing game, but it's made by indigenous folks. It is based in a futuristic version of Cahokia, a Cahokia that never was. So again, if you want or are interested in more about this, and you like my ideas, but you're like, I want more, I am happy to direct you to an indigenous team that did a fantastic freaking job with this game. Now, with that out of the way, what do I think is the most interesting things about Cahokia, and how do I think you could use those in your game? Well, as this giant earthen mound can attest to, I think one of the big things that really intrigues me about Cahokia is its scale, its scope, its size, right? When we think about the architectural wonders of the world, it's kind of amazing that these people were able to do this using essentially baskets and hand tools, which is staggering by any stretch of the imagination. And what really blows my mind, though, is that Cahokia in general, and Mississippian culture as a whole in the United States, stretches massively. This means that numerous settlements, mounds, fortresses, and towns were established all across North America. And what I think is most impressive about this are its trade routes. One of the coolest things, and yes, I know this is a Neolithic image. Shockingly enough, there are not a ton of great images of the native Cahokians, or at least Native Americans in general. Thanks, colonial settlers, for taking those out. But one of the things that I think is most impressive, and the thing that I would honestly lean into one of those games, is the use of Cahokia's trade routes. We found things like bronze, glass, and turquoise from Central America, Canada, and all across what would become the United States in Cahokia's burial mounds. This means that Cahokia was the center point, the hub of a vast international trade network at a time where there weren't paved roads or GPS. That is absolutely staggering, and I think if you're going to use Cahokia as a bit of inspiration for one of your games, I really think that you should focus on the trade routes, forging new trade routes between a player's home and their hub cities, working to sort of keep existing merchants and mercantile empires happy with the work that you're doing, and protecting from fraud. One of the coolest things that I think you could do is maybe draw some comparisons to Spice and Wolf, which is a fantastic piece of anime as well, and also, by the way, the armed guards in Aztec markets. I imagine the players are maybe not working for a trade consortium, but might be working for tribal leaders or for Cahokia itself, or your stand-in for Cahokia, and are doing that as a way to get trade going and to continue this vast interconnected trade web that moves throughout the area. I think it's one of the most interesting things that I've read, and the accounts of the not just the size, but the sheer scale of the trading operation of the Cahokians makes it one of the most impressive, not just for the time, but in human history, in terms for how robust, effective, and efficient it was at a time where we didn't have the kind of technology that you and I take for granted. It just goes to show the complexity and efficiency and intelligence of this people as a civilization. It's one of the coolest things that I've ever read. I would highly encourage you to look into the Cahokian trade networks and into the pre-age of settlement, or at least pre-age of European settlement, I should say, when you're trying to lean into Cahokia as a piece of inspiration for your games. But now we come to the second civilization that I think makes for a fantastic piece of inspiration, a civilization that is fueled by intense architecture, incredible environmental biodiversity, and intrigue out the wazoo. We are talking about the Angkor period of the Khmer, which is how you would say it in English, or the Khmer, which is the proper way to say it in their native tongue. I tried really hard to try to get some of the pronunciations correct for this, so I'm trying my best. If you are somebody who is a Khmer speaker or a Khmer speaker, please let me know in the comments below if there's stuff I need to get rotated, because it was really cool. This video originally had way more different civilizations, and then I fell down the rabbit hole of researching the Angkor period of the Khmer, and I gotta tell you, this is everything that you want out of an RPG, and it starts with this guy right here. This is Jayavarman II, or Jayavarman the second, a messianic sort of uniter king of the Angkor period. He takes the disparate groups in the region, which is now modern-day Cambodia, and thrusts them together, fending off basically invasions from everywhere to construct one of the most robust states that I've ever seen. And this period is so perfect for a role-playing game because there's everything you want. Do you want palace intrigue? You've got it. The Khmer Empire makes Conan the Barbarian look like a simpleton when he's drifting through all of the palace intrigues in his stories. There are so many different royal factions, so many descendants who claim either lineage to Jayavarman or Jayavarman II, or to some other member of local myth and legend, and as a result, there is constant interscene political conflict. This means that your players entering into a region like the Khmer or the Khmer means that they're going to experience all manner of political dealings, backstabbing, and machinations as they're attempting to navigate things. Do you want civil war? Because oh boy, you've got it. All of those palace intrigues boil over into massive conflict throughout the entire region's history, but particularly during the Angkor period, where although, the Khmer Empire does get to expand, it does fend off its enemies, both foreign and domestic, it is still crackling with these sort of civil war battles, civil skirmishes, and civil issues all over the place. It winds up being an incredible time where mercenaries, sellswords, or individuals with a penchant for battle and a willingness to do whatever it takes to rise through the ranks could find boundless opportunities. It actually reminds me quite a lot of Renaissance-era Italy in the way that its political structure and political factions function. And I think that's part of the reason I fell in love with the Khmer and this period of Khmer history as much as I did when I was making this video. There are so many parallels to the Khmer Empire and to places like the Holy Roman Empire or Renaissance-era Italy and its city-states back in Europe. It's a really interesting thing, and I'm so excited because expansion, just like with those empires in Europe, expansion played a major role, particularly, now this is a map, by the way, from 1290 and 1760, but you can see that Cambodia, which would have been that purple region right there, which would have been where Jayavarman started, is almost always focusing on expansion, and at parts during Jayavarman's reign, it would have expanded past that purple area. This means that if you're not busy fighting each other, there is numerous opportunities to sort of work with the players to expand either their holdings or to have them fight alongside an established power and expand their holdings there. This is very indicative of something like the 100 Years' War, where this is one of the really interesting things too, where there's like a lot of I don't want to say cross-pollination, but there's a lot of leaders from the surrounding countries of the Khmer that marry into Khmer royalty, and Khmer royalty that marries into a lot of the royal families or ruling classes of the outlying regions. And so just like the 100 Years' War, where you have French kings who have some legitimate claim to English holdings, and you have English kings who have legitimate claim to French holdings, you have Khmer rulers who do have some sort of legitimate claim to these areas, and vice versa. Again, I told you there's a lot of really interesting parallels between the Khmer and between the issues in medieval Europe. And incredible urban planning. When we talk about fantasy role-playing games, one of the things that crops up all the time is stupendous architecture, the works of art and artifice that seem like they defy not just gravity, but the laws of science, man, and God. And holy crap, dude. If you look at the Khmer Empire, but specifically the canal work around Angkor Wat and the surrounding sections, it makes Venice look like a kiddie pool. It's unbelievable. It makes even like something like Tenochtitlan in Mexico, the Aztec Empire makes it look pathetic. It dwarfs, it eclipses it. At one point, there were literally 1 million people in this urban center. So what you have are heavily fortified temple cities surrounding Angkor Wat, which is the central area, connected by literal hundreds of miles of irrigation canals that pull double duty, both as irrigation for the surrounding cropland, but also as a method of transportation for soldiers, for people, and for goods. You literally had a highway system in the water. It's unbelievable. It is the stuff of fantasy literature. Seriously, the pictures of Angkor Wat and its surrounding areas do not do this civic innovation justice at all. I can only imagine what it must have been like to be a traveler, somebody who maybe is not used to things like modern highway systems, and to have gone to or traveled to the Khmer region to experience it for what it is. And just to watch it all happen, it's astounding. Imagine being an adventurer and you're so used to like systems of even paved roads or whatever is left over, whatever remnant remains from your previous empire, or whatever previous political infrastructure of whatever kingdom you come through, and there are literal hundreds of miles of clear transport across water that connect over 1 million people in a series of heavily fortified agricultural and architectural wonders. Literally, the Khmer period in Angkor, it felt, again, reading this felt like it was like a more fantastical version of what medieval Europe was like. It's unbelievable. It was so cool. Seriously. And by the way, if you're going to be running a campaign, I can't help but think that basically playing through something reminiscent of the Khmer Empire would be like Game of Thrones on crack. Literally, you have everything. You have messianic figures like Jehoshaphat and Jehoshaphat II, Jehoshaphat VII, who are two figures that both united the region of the Khmer at different points during its history. You have interesting civil war, massive political intrigue, enemies without and within. And on top of all of that, some of the coolest battles that I've ever gotten to read about. We're literally 2 dragons away from this being a George R.R. Martin novel. It's absolutely spectacular. You can consider this entire video a Khmer fan post. That's it. I am officially Khmer pilled. This was so cool to read about and so cool to study. And because I wanted to sort of think a little bit more heavily about the inspiration for our games, I wanted to delve into the mythology of the Khmer a little bit. And so this is a Nikta, which is a type of ancestral spirit. Think of it kind of like a minor deity, but usually it is the spirit of an ancestor. So it's actually very similar. Again, the similarities between the Khmer and my studies of medieval Europe continue, but it's very similar in some ways to the saint cults that cropped up in different sections of medieval Europe, where individual villages would venerate a saint, a Catholic saint, for protection. In this case, several different places in the Khmer Empire would venerate fallen ancestors who would then protect that region. Sometimes they would protect a village, a forest, a river, a road system, whatever. What I thought was really neat and really interesting about this, however, was that usually they're worshipped as pairs, they're worshipped as couples, which I thought was cool. So it's not just like your grandmother that protects it, but your grandparents together, their union, their love, and that relationship that sort of transcends life and death and allows them to come back as a Nikta to protect that region, protect those people. I thought that was really neat. While we're on the topic, however, one of the things that continued to crop up in my research, and the reason there's not like a quote-unquote monster for this section, is a lot of the Khmer myth and legend, particularly as it pertains to characters or what we would consider, quote-unquote creatures in folklore, is tied to religion. And now, here's the thing. You might have heard of things like Naga, for example, that usually crops up in the monster manual, but the Naga in the Khmer myth is not a monster or type of monster. It is a god, an aspect of a Hindu deity. So, like, making it a monster would be incredibly disrespectful. The same thing with something like the Garuda, which is a half man, half bird soldier looking thing. I realize that that's like a terrible way, but probably a pretty disrespectful way of describing the Garuda. But the Garuda is, in addition to that, another aspect of Vishnu, the Hindu deity of preservation, and also, a number of different things. So one of the things that I would completely steer away from if I'm going to do a campaign inspired by the Khmer would be to steer away from portraying those creatures in those light. And again, I'm going to stop calling them creatures, but it's hard to like juggle what is the religious nomenclature with what would be like the TTRPG nomenclature. But again, I would stay away from portraying those folkloric figures. That's probably a better way of doing it, outside of that negative light, because to do so is incredibly disrespectful, at least from what I've read, to the Khmer culture and to the Khmer belief system. But one more thing, though, that I thought was interesting that ties into all of this, the Nikta, the Garuda, the Naga, is that what makes this area, this period of history so fascinating is the cross-religious pollination that exists within the Khmer region. So what you're looking at right now is a Buddhist temple, and the Buddhist religion, the Buddhist faith, Buddhism in general, winds up being a massive moving and focal point of the Khmer culturally and religiously for a long time, but it usually takes root with the common folk. You also have that sort of interspersed with a devout Hindu population and a very important Hindu cultural force within the region, with Hindu priests enjoying both religious and political roles, kind of like in Egypt, actually. It was pretty fascinating to read about. And on top of all of that, you combine these things with a shamanistic tradition that predates both Hindu and Buddhist traditions. So essentially what you have is a region that not only is rife with political conflict and civil war, but one that has a very rich religious tapestry woven together of Hindu, Buddhist, and shamanistic traditions, and all of those are then juxtaposed with cultural, religious, and economic ideas brought in through its vast trade network from places like Mongolia, China, and India. This means, and this makes, this region of the world incredibly interesting to study, because you can see bits and pieces, elements of other folklores, other religions, other histories, and other stories present in the Khmer region. I really love this because it lends itself to a very, just a really diverse period of time to study, and a diverse period of stories with which you could base your games on. It's a really intriguing concept, and I love the idea that there is this sort of politically charged, ethnically diverse, and religiously interwoven section of the world that it goes on to dominate a lot of trade and political discussion and political movement within the East for a very long period of time. It's a really interesting concept. Now, one more thing, if you're going to try to lean into the Khmer for a little bit of inspiration, the Khmer and Khmer culture actually did go on to inspire one fantasy setting already. If you're an MTG player, Khans of Tarkir was one of the sets that came out back in 2012, if I'm not mistaken, and one of the clans of Tarkir essentially were the Sultai, and the Sultai took heavy, and I mean, you can look at both the stuff in the background as well as the adornments of these characters. They took heavy inspiration from Cambodian myth and legend, and that includes stuff from the Khmer period, as well as Khmer folklore, Khmer legend, and Khmer culture. I think this is pretty interesting, so if you're looking for a more modern take on those things, I would take a look at the Sultai. I don't know exactly how faithful this is in general to the deeper meanings of the Khmer culture and Khmer religion and Khmer ethnic belief, but I do, like, you can see, at least on surface level, it looks pretty good. So again, please make sure that you're doing your due diligence before you're trying to add too much of this stuff into a game. Please make sure that you're trying to delve a little bit deeper into it. And speaking of delving in deeper into this, I have included some sources at the end of this video for further reading if you're interested in any of the stuff that we talked about. But again, dude, I think the Khmer is really interesting. I would run it like Game of Thrones. I think it would be absolutely incredible. So, and I think you should too. Or at the very least, if me ranting for 10 minutes has inspired you to do anything, you should at the very least try to check out the Khmer and the Khmer culture. But with that being said, folks, it does bring us to the end of today's video. If you like this, you can go join the Patreon. $3 a month, you get your name in the credits. $10 a month, you get all the cool stuff. Plus, you get a unique game you can't get anywhere else. If you want to check out our RPGs, that QR code will take you to our itch.io page. But of course, there's a link in the description below as well. And if you're a physical copy person, you could get physical copies from Tabletop Bookshelf, Indie Press Revolution, and Exalted Funeral. With that being said, here are some sources for further reading. Very interesting stuff, but again, this is more of a general overview. I didn't want to get you all too deep into the weeds, but these are all 5 pretty, not short reads, but 5 reasonable-ish reads if you're wanting to learn a little bit more about Cahokia and the Khmer culture in general. I think these are a really good place to start so that you can maybe do some further reading and some further research to maybe help charge your games and get you some cool ideas. And last but certainly not least, I do have to give a massive thank you to our patrons: Dionysus, Chris Bates, Agile Monk, Aiden Delaney, Stefan Brasseau, Solution, Alex.VKSH. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for your contributions. These allow me to continue to make videos like this one and to continue to do the dork-like work that I do now. But until next time, folks, I'm Kyle out for Desks and Dorks. You've all been amazing. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.